My name is Lila, I'm 36 years old, and the day my brother locked me out of the hotel I saved with my own hands, I knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't step back from. Blood didn't stop him. Love didn't slow him down. And I didn't scream, I watched. Stay with me till the end. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more family drama, quiet revenge and emotional courage stories. The morning it finally became clear started like any other. No shouting. No warning. Just silence that felt heavier than noise. I pulled into the gravel lot behind the hotel just before 7. Coffee cooling in the cup holder, sun barely up. Something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of the car. The front desk lights were off. They were always on. Always. Even when business was slow. I told myself it was nothing, but my chest tightened anyway. I tried my key on the office door. It didn't turn. I tried again, slower. Nothing. That lock had recognized me for 12 years. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the handle like it might explain itself. When I knocked, no one answered. That's when I noticed the new sign taped to the window. Management only beyond this point. I was management. Or I had been. That sign felt like a slap delivered with a smile. My brother Dean finally appeared from the hallway, tie loose, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't look surprised to see me. That hurt more than the lock. He covered the phone and said, "We need to talk later, Lila. Not now. Not here. Later." Like I was a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Then he turned his back on me and kept walking. I stood there feeling small in a place I'd rebuilt piece by piece. This hotel had been a boarded-up mess when I took it over. Broken ice machine. Mold in the laundry room. 5 rooms that couldn't be rented without shame. I fixed it with overtime pay, small loans, and more patience than I knew I had. Dean had shown up years later, after his divorce, after his job loss, saying he just wanted to help. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. That morning I walked the property alone. A guest stopped me near the vending machines and asked why their room hadn't been cleaned. I apologized even though housekeeping schedules weren't mine anymore. Another guest complained about the hot water. I wrote it down out of habit, even though my clipboard felt like a prop. Every problem came back to me like the building itself still knew who cared. By noon the desk clerk avoided my eyes. The maintenance man shrugged when I asked about a leaking pipe I'd reported days earlier. Dean said not to worry, he told me. That name again. Dean said. Dean decided. Dean signed. Each sentence pushed me further outside my own life. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused. Confusion hurt slower but deeper. I finally caught Dean near the supply closet. I asked him why my access code didn't work. He sighed like I was the problem. "I'm streamlining things," he said. "Too many cooks." I reminded him that the loan was in my name, that the hotel license was mine. He smiled without warmth and said, "Relax. I've got it under control." That was the moment something inside me went quiet. That afternoon, a delivery truck left without unloading. Dean had canceled the account. No warning. No replacement. Guests noticed empty shelves by dinner. Complaints started stacking up. I watched it all unfold piece by piece, like someone loosening bolts while smiling at you. That's when I understood this wasn't carelessness. This was intent. I went home early, which I never did. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my hands. These were the hands that had scrubbed carpets, painted trim, folded sheets until midnight. I thought about calling him. I thought about driving back and demanding answers. Instead, I listened. I listened to the quiet part of myself that said, "He won't stop if you fight him. He'll just hide better." That night sleep didn't come. I kept replaying moments I'd brushed off before. The missing receipts. The staff changes he made without asking. The way he spoke for me in meetings. All the small things I'd excused because family makes you generous to your own harm. By morning the truth felt solid. He wasn't making mistakes. He was making moves. The next day I showed up again. Calm. Polite. I watched him interrupt staff. I watched him promise guests things the hotel couldn't deliver. I watched him cut corners I'd spent years reinforcing. Every decision chipped away at the place, and every chip carried my name. That's when the weight hit me. He wasn't just ruining the hotel. He was letting everyone believe I was the reason. I caught my reflection in the lobby mirror and barely recognized myself. Tired eyes. Straight back. A woman learning something painful too late. I realized confronting him wouldn't save anything. It would only speed up the damage. What I needed was clarity, not control. Proof, not arguments. Time, not noise. So I stopped correcting him. I stopped jumping in. I wrote things down instead. Dates. Times. Small choices with big consequences. I smiled when he took credit. I nodded when he dismissed concerns. Inside I was bracing. Not for a fight. For the truth to show itself fully. That day ended quietly. No explosion. No apology. Just a certainty settling in my bones. Dean wasn't going to stop. And if I wanted to survive what came next, I had to let him believe he was winning. I let him believe he was winning. And the very next morning proved how fast that belief could turn everything against me. When I walked into the lobby, the air felt tense, like a room after an argument no one admits happened. 2 guests stood at the desk, arms crossed. The clerk looked relieved when she saw me, then nervous, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be. One guest pointed straight at me and said, "We've been asking for hours. Are you the owner or not?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Before I could answer, Dean's voice came from behind the office door. "She handles the paperwork," he said loudly. "I handle operations." The guest nodded, already disappointed, and turned back to complain about their reservation being lost. I stood there, officially labeled as the invisible half, the one responsible but powerless. That was the first public cut, and it didn't bleed right away. By midweek, the blame had found its rhythm. Vendors called me instead of him when checks bounced. A linen company left 3 voicemails asking why payments were late. I hadn't touched the accounts in weeks, but my name was still attached. Each message felt like a quiet accusation. I returned calls carefully, apologizing without explaining, because explaining would sound like excuses. I could hear it in their voices. Trust slipping, one polite sentence at a time. Staff meetings stopped including me. I'd walk past the break room and hear laughter cut off. One housekeeper pulled me aside and whispered, "Is everything okay? He says we might have to cut hours." I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to say I never approved that. Instead I said, "We'll get through it." She nodded, but her eyes didn't believe me. Mine didn't either. Guests began leaving notes under my door at home. Actual handwritten notes, slid through the mail slot, asking for refunds or explanations. Someone had told them I lived nearby. I read them at my kitchen counter, the paper soft from being folded too many times. One woman wrote about her anniversary ruined by a broken heater. Another mentioned mold in the bathroom that hadn't been there before. I remembered approving repairs that never happened. Each note felt like a personal failure, even when I knew it wasn't. At the grocery store, a man I recognized from the hotel aisle stared at me a second too long. "You run that place by the highway, right?" he asked. I nodded. He shook his head, not angry, just disappointed. "Used to be better." Then he walked away. No argument. No drama. Just a verdict delivered between the bread and the milk. Dean, meanwhile, played the role of calm leadership. He greeted guests with wide smiles. He spoke confidently to inspectors. He reassured staff loudly, always within earshot. When problems came up, he'd sigh and say, "I'm cleaning up old issues." Old. As if decay had a single owner. I noticed how often my name was paired with the word before. One afternoon, a health inspector showed up unannounced. I stood in the hallway listening to doors open and close, to murmured notes being taken. Dean walked with him, nodding, blaming past neglect. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend. I stood by the vending machines and watched a snack get stuck halfway down, unreachable. It felt like a metaphor I didn't need explained. The phone rang constantly. Friends who knew about the hotel asked careful questions. "Is everything okay over there?" They'd say, the way people do when they've already heard something. I told them we were adjusting. Adjusting became my shield. It was vague enough to end the conversation, honest enough to sit with. At night, I replayed conversations I wasn't part of. I imagined staff talking about me when I wasn't there. I imagined guests sharing stories online, attaching my name to their frustration. I wanted to correct the record, but something held me back. Every time I considered stepping in, I saw how easily Dean redirected blame. How smoothly he deflected. Arguing would only make me look defensive. Silence, painful as it was, felt cleaner. One evening, a longtime regular stopped me in the parking lot. He'd stayed there every fall for years. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. "You used to care." That one hurt the most because it wasn't angry. It was sad. I told him I still did. He nodded like he wanted to believe me, then loaded his bags and drove off to a different place down the road. Inside, I was splitting in two. One part of me wanted to scream my side of the story. The other part kept notes. Dates. Names. Decisions I hadn't made but was blamed for. I wrote them down in a plain notebook, nothing dramatic. Just facts. It grounded me. Gave me something solid when everything else felt slippery. Dean started making changes faster. Cutting costs where guests notice first. Cheaper supplies. Fewer staff. Shorter hours at the desk. Each decision created a ripple that came back to me. A woman cornered me near the ice machine and said, "You should be ashamed." I apologized because that was easier than explaining a family fracture to a stranger. I stopped defending myself online. Reviews piled up. Some mentioned my name directly. Others just said, "Management." Each one felt like a stone added to my pockets. Heavy but useful. Weight keeps you from floating away. It keeps you grounded in what's real. There were moments I almost broke. Once when a staff member quit in tears. Another time when a supplier canceled without warning. I sat in my car and cried quietly, hands on the wheel, because crying anywhere else felt like admitting guilt. Then I wiped my face and went back inside. People assumed my silence meant acceptance. Or weakness. Or indifference. They were wrong, but I let them think it. Watching the damage hurt more than doing the work ever had. But watching also taught me patterns. Taught me how blame moves faster than truth. Taught me how confidence can hide carelessness. By the end of that stretch, my reputation felt thinner than the walls of the rooms I'd once repaired myself. I carried the weight of every complaint, every glance, every whispered doubt. And through it all I stayed. I listened. I watched. Because somewhere beneath the blame, beneath the damage, I was learning exactly how deep the cracks went. I stayed where I was, holding that knowledge quietly, because stepping back any further meant doing something that went against everything I believed about responsibility. The idea of giving Dean full control felt like dropping the last rope while still standing on the edge. Yet the next morning, when he told the staff he'd be handling everything directly from now on, I didn't correct him. I watched their faces turn toward me, waiting for confirmation. I gave a small nod and felt something inside me tighten. Handing over authority wasn't a single moment. It happened in pieces. First, I stopped reviewing schedules. Then I stopped approving supply orders. When Dean announced he'd be signing vendor contracts himself, I signed the access forms without comment. Each signature felt heavier than the last. I told myself this was temporary, but the word felt thin. Temporary doesn't feel like erasing your name from the place you built. Dean moved fast once the reins were fully in his hands. He rearranged the office, moved my old desk into storage, and brought in a new filing cabinet with a lock I didn't have a key for. He called it efficiency. I called it distance. When I walked past the office later and saw my framed certificate leaning against the wall, facing inward, I kept walking. Staff reactions were mixed. Some seemed relieved to have one clear voice giving orders. Others avoided me, unsure where I stood now. One afternoon, a younger desk clerk asked quietly, "Are you still in charge?" I smiled and said, "He is." The words tasted strange. She nodded, but her shoulders dropped, like something dependable had been removed without warning. Dean's confidence grew louder. He talked about cutting unnecessary comforts to save money. He bragged about running a tighter ship. I listened as he explained changes I knew would frustrate guests. Shorter desk hours. Fewer cleaning days. Delayed repairs. I didn't argue. I wrote things down later alone with steady hands that surprised me. Giving him control meant giving up daily presence. I stopped showing up early. I stopped staying late. Instead, I came at odd hours, quietly observing. I watched how he spoke to guests when they complained. I noticed how often promises were made without plans to keep them. He believed charm could replace consistency. It couldn't, but he hadn't learned that yet. One evening, I overheard him telling a contractor the hotel was finally being run right. I stood behind the soda machine and listened. The contractor laughed and said, "About time." That laugh stayed with me all night. It echoed in my head while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. wondering how easily a story can change when the right voice tells it. Letting go also meant swallowing my instincts. When a pipe burst in one of the ground floor rooms, I knew exactly what needed to be done. I'd handled worse. Instead, I waited. Dean delayed the repair, saying it wasn't urgent. Guests were moved. Apologies were rushed. The smell lingered. I felt it like a bruise every time I passed that hallway. Still, I stayed quiet. There were moments when Dean tested my silence. He'd glance at me during meetings, as if daring me to interrupt. When I didn't, his shoulders relaxed. He mistook restraint for surrender. That misunderstanding gave him confidence. Confidence made him careless. I could see it happening even as it hurt to witness. Friends asked why I wasn't around as much. I told them I was taking a step back. They nodded, assuming it was rest. It wasn't. It was endurance. I filled my days with small tasks at home. Anything to keep from driving over unannounced. I folded laundry slowly. I cleaned already clean counters. I waited. Dean's decisions began to stack. He hired a friend to handle maintenance. Someone with enthusiasm but little experience. Things took longer. Fixes didn't last. Guests noticed. Complaints grew sharper. When someone confronted me in the parking lot about a broken lock, I said, "I'll pass it along." The phrase felt like a betrayal and a shield all at once. The hardest part was watching Dean enjoy it. He walked taller. He laughed louder. He talked about expansion plans that didn't make sense. He told people the hotel had been holding him back before. I realized he believed his own version of events. That belief made him bold. Boldness unchecked leaves tracks. I had to remind myself why I was doing this. Every time my chest tightened, I went back to my notebook. Facts don't argue. They wait. I noted dates, decisions, outcomes. I kept receipts I didn't sign. Emails I wasn't copied on. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. That distinction mattered to me. One night, Dean called me to brag about a cost-saving idea. He wanted praise. I gave him a neutral response. Silence stretched. He laughed it off and hung up. I sat there afterward, phone in my lap, heart pounding. Letting him take control meant letting him believe I needed his approval. That was a hard illusion to maintain. There were days I questioned myself. Days I wondered if I was letting pride get in the way of fixing things sooner. But every time I pictured stepping back in, I saw the chaos it would cause. I saw arguments. I saw blame shift again. This way the line stayed clear. He decided. He acted. He owned it. As weeks passed, the distance between us grew. Conversations became shorter. He stopped asking my opinion altogether. That stung, but it also confirmed what I needed to know. He wasn't looking for partnership. He wanted control without accountability. I gave him exactly that. The choice cost me sleep. It cost me reputation. It cost me comfort. But it gave me something else, something steadier. Perspective. Watching from the outside showed me patterns I'd missed before. It showed me how power changes people when no one questions them. By the time I fully stepped back, there was no confusion about who was in charge. Dean had the title, the keys, the confidence. I had my notebook, my patience, and a clarity that settled deep in my bones. Letting him take control felt like losing everything I'd built. In truth, it was the moment I stopped guessing and started knowing. I didn't feel relief when the first crack appeared. I felt a quiet tightening in my chest, like the air changing before a storm. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind that usually passed without notice. I was sitting at my kitchen table, notebook open, when my phone rang. The bank manager's name lit up the screen. He hadn't called me directly in months. I answered slowly, already knowing this wasn't a courtesy call. His voice was polite but firm. He asked if I was aware of several missed payments and a line of credit adjustment I hadn't approved. I told him calmly that I was aware of none of it. There was a pause. Not awkward. Careful. He said they needed clarification and suggested a meeting. When the call ended, I didn't write anything down. I already had enough ink on paper. What I felt instead was certainty settling into place. The meeting was scheduled for the following day. Dean found out before I could tell him. He called me, irritated, asking why the bank was suddenly confused. I told him they wanted to review recent decisions. He laughed and said it was routine. The laugh sounded thin, stretched too far. I said nothing more. Silence by then was my language. At the bank, the room smelled like coffee and old carpet. I sat across from two managers and a stack of printed statements. They asked direct questions. I gave direct answers. When they showed documents with my name attached to changes I hadn't made, I shook my head. Not dramatically. Just once. The notebook stayed in my bag. I didn't need it yet. They asked if Dean had full authority. I said yes. The word felt heavy but honest. They asked if I'd approved the decisions. I said no. No emotion. No defense. Just no. One of them leaned back, folding his hands. I could tell the conversation had shifted. It wasn't about confusion anymore. It was about responsibility. Word traveled fast after that. A safety inspector arrived the same week, responding to complaints that had piled up. I happened to be on site that afternoon, sitting in the lobby with a book I wasn't reading. Dean paced nearby, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight. When the inspector asked who was in charge, Dean answered quickly. For the first time, no one looked at me. The inspection took hours. Doors opened. Notes were taken. Dean's confidence frayed at the edges. He snapped at a staff member over a misplaced key. The inspector noticed. I noticed too. Stress changes people. It reveals habits they hide when things go smoothly. I stayed where I was, hands folded, breathing slow. By the end of the week, vendors stopped calling me. They called him. That alone told me everything was shifting. Accountability had found its address. One supplier requested a written plan. Another demanded payment before delivery. Dean brushed it off in front of staff, but I saw the tension in his jaw when he thought no one was watching. The moment the truth stepped fully into the light came quietly. No shouting. No scene. Just an email forwarded to me by mistake. It detailed a decision Dean had made. One that directly contradicted local regulations. His name was on it. Only his. I read it twice, then printed it and placed it gently between pages of my notebook. Fit there like it belonged. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I waited for him to realize what had happened. That took less than a day. He called me late that night, voice low, asking if I'd seen the email. I told him yes. There was a long pause. Then he said, "We need to talk." I agreed. We met in the office after closing. The lights hummed overhead. The place felt smaller without guests, stripped of distraction. Dean started talking fast, explaining, justifying, blaming, timing, pressure, misunderstanding. I let him finish. When he stopped, I slid the notebook across the desk. I didn't open it. I didn't point. I just let it sit there. "What's that?" he asked. "My record," I said. He frowned, then waved it away. "You're overthinking this." I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. "No," I said. I stopped guessing. That was when his posture changed. He leaned back, crossed his arms, tried to regain control. He asked if I was threatening him. I told him no. I wasn't threatening anything. I was answering questions honestly when they were asked. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. Over the next few days, more questions came. From the bank. From regulators. From a regional partner he'd assured everything was fine. Each time I answered with the same calm clarity. I didn't volunteer information. I didn't protect him either. I told the truth as it was. Clean. Unembellished. Dean tried to rally support. He spoke to staff privately, framing the situation as outside pressure. Some believed him. Others didn't. I could see it in how they listened. Trust, once cracked, doesn't split evenly. It shows hairline fractures you can't hide. One afternoon, he confronted me in the hallway. "You're enjoying this," he said, eyes sharp. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I'm done carrying it." That answer stopped him. He looked around as if searching for witnesses, then walked away. His steps were quicker than usual. The truth kept surfacing, not because I pushed it, but because it had been buried too shallow. Decisions stacked on decisions. Promises made without backing. Shortcuts taken without care. When inspectors returned with follow-up questions, Dean struggled to answer. He glanced at me once, a flicker of something like panic crossing his face. I didn't respond. I felt no triumph. What I felt was a strange calm. The weight I'd been carrying shifted off my shoulders and settled where it belonged. That didn't erase the damage. It didn't restore my reputation overnight. But it restored something quieter. My sense of self. When the bank outlined corrective steps, they addressed him. When they discussed long-term consequences, they looked at him. My name was no longer the first spoken. That mattered more than I expected. It was proof that silence, used carefully, can speak louder than defense. The final conversation between us that week was brief. Dean said he hadn't expected this to happen. I told him neither had I, but expectation wasn't the issue. Responsibility was. He didn't argue. He just nodded once and looked away. As I left the hotel that evening, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The building looked tired, worn by decisions it hadn't chosen. I paused, hand on the door of my car, and breathed in the familiar smell of asphalt and dust. The truth was out now. Not because I forced it, but because I stopped shielding it. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel blamed. I felt seen. I stood there a moment longer after that realization, the quiet settling around me like a deep breath finally released. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to rush away or brace myself. I drove home slowly, windows cracked, letting the evening air move through the car. That night, sleep came easier. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. The next morning, I returned to the hotel early, earlier than I had in weeks. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaner and old carpet, familiar and grounding. A few staff members looked surprised to see me. One smiled. It was small, hesitant, but real. I greeted them calmly, without announcements or explanations. I didn't need to reclaim space loudly. Just by being present, things shifted. Over the following days, changes happened quietly. Dean packed his things from the office without ceremony. No shouting. No final argument. He avoided eye contact, moving quickly like someone trying not to linger where they no longer belonged. When he left the building for the last time, I watched from the front desk. I didn't wave. I didn't turn away either. I let the moment exist as it was. Taking the hotel back wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, meetings, long phone calls, and careful steps forward. The bank required a plan. Inspectors followed up. Vendors asked cautious questions. I answered each one patiently. Trust doesn't return all at once. It arrives in pieces like morning light through blinds. I accepted that. I rehung my certificate in the office, not for pride but for grounding. I moved my desk back, dusted the surface, and placed my notebook in the top drawer. I didn't need it the same way anymore, but I wasn't ready to let it go. It reminded me of what attention and restraint can do. Staff meetings resumed, smaller and quieter. I listened more than I spoke. Some employees shared frustrations they kept to themselves. Others apologized for doubting me. I told them there was nothing to apologize for. Pressure makes people believe the loudest voice. I understood that better now. Repairs began slowly, one room at a time. A new lock here, fresh paint there. I rolled up my sleeves alongside the maintenance crew, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The work felt honest. Guests noticed. A couple thanked me for fixing the heater that had been broken during their last stay. Their gratitude felt earned. Not everything returned to how it had been. Some regulars never came back. Some reviews stayed online, frozen in time. I accepted those too. They were part of the story now, whether I liked it or not. I learned that peace doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from standing steady in the present. Dean didn't reach out. I didn't either. Losing the illusion of family closeness hurt more than losing money or reputation. I had believed blood meant protection. Letting go of that belief felt like losing a limb at first. Then it felt like relief. Boundaries, I learned, are not punishments. They're safety. One afternoon, I sat in the lobby watching sunlight move across the floor. A guest asked if I'd always owned the place. I smiled and said, "I've taken care of it for a long time." That answer felt right. Ownership isn't just paperwork. It's presence. It's accountability. It's staying when things get hard. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. The urge faded slowly, like a habit losing its grip. When thoughts of blame crept in, I redirected them toward what was in front of me. A clean room. A working light. A guest checking in without complaint. Progress doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly. One evening, a former employee stopped by. She'd left during the worst of it. She apologized for leaving suddenly. I told her I understood. She said the place felt different now. Lighter. I watched her walk out and realized she was right. The building hadn't changed overnight, but the weight inside it had shifted. At home, my life grew quieter too. I cooked more. I walked in the mornings. I called friends I'd avoided when things were falling apart. I told them the truth without bitterness. Sharing it felt less like reopening wounds and more like closing them properly. There were still hard days. Days when a bill arrived unexpectedly. Days when a guest complained loudly. Days when I wondered if stepping back sooner would have saved something. But regret didn't settle the way it used to. I acknowledged it, then let it pass. Learning doesn't always come gently. The hotel stabilized over time. Not booming. Not struggling. Steady. I found comfort in that word. Steady meant sustainable. It meant I could breathe without waiting for the next problem. It meant I could plan again, modestly, realistically. One night, as I locked the office, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked older, tired in a different way. But there was a calm there I hadn't seen before. A kind of acceptance that didn't ask for permission. I smiled at it briefly, then turned off the light. Keeping the hotel wasn't about winning. It was about choosing myself without apology. Losing the illusion of family loyalty freed me from expectations that had never protected me. Finding peace didn't come from revenge or validation. It came from clarity. As I drove home, the sign by the highway flickered softly, familiar and steady. I realized then that regret had visited my brother in ways I didn't need to witness. My peace didn't depend on his understanding. It depended on my own. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the quiet. The journey had taken more from me than I expected, but it had also given me something solid in return. A life shaped by truth. A business rebuilt on honesty. A heart no longer divided by illusion. That was enough.